India, a vibrant economy of more than 1 billion people, is no exception to economic cooling the world over. At present, Prime Minister Narendra Modi's Make in India campaign and upcoming general elections will restructure India's development path. But the U.S. India trade tensions and ongoing conflict over Kashmir have caused more concerns. What are the main reasons behind the economic slowdown of these emerging markets? And how will the U.S. India trade tensions affect its domestic economy and upcoming elections? And how does the Indian Chamber of Commerce position itself in facing more uncertainties? To discuss the many issues surrounding the Indian economy and more, I'm very pleased to have Sandeep Somani, President at the Federation of Indian Chambers of Commerce and Industry at the Broad Asia Forum. That's our topic. This is a dialogue. I'm Yang Ray. Welcome to discussion here, gentlemen.
Thank you, Ray. Good afternoon, and thank you for having me over on the show.
Bad news is that the growth rate of the Indian economy slowed down and to its slowest pace in our living memory. Particularly, you look at the outstanding performance of the economy in recent years. But what are the reasons behind the slowdown?
Well, I wouldn't say it slowed down to its lowest rate ever. It has slowed down to its lowest rate in the last 6 quarters. In our quarter one, as you know, we have a financial year starting on 1st April and ending on 31st March. Our Q1 growth was 8%. Our Q2 growth was 7.4%. The Q3 growth that you are referring to has come out at 6.6%. We could see the slowdown coming, and the slowdown is on account of issues in agriculture relating to lower pricing, and also in terms of the general credit squeeze in the market. The RBI had tightened the market, which is the Reserve Bank of India, and there's a liquidity issue because of which the slowdown has been felt. However, as industry, we are quite hopeful that in the coming quarters this will be made up. There is a new RBI governor, and he has already reduced the interest rates by 25 basis points. I hope and wish that there will be some more cuts in the months to come, and I think the economy will come back again on track in the year 2019. We believe the IMF is predicting, and the Reserve Bank itself is predicting, a 7.4% growth for India in 2019. So we are hopeful.
IMF and other agencies have, rating agencies have somehow lowered their forecast for the world's economy in the year 2019. Perhaps India will be a nice exception. However, to my knowledge, the job growth rate between 2017 and 2018 was 0. And that was pretty disappointing for Prime Minister Modi, whose survey of the opinions said back in 2014 that he's going to create 10 million jobs. And the Center of Monitoring Indian Economy, a rating agency, said despite the official figure of 3 million jobs created during the Modi administration, their actual prediction for the job growth was actually lower than 3 million. So what do you think of the differences and discrepancies?
So, very good question. Now let me explain to you. There's a lot of complexity in India in terms of number as far as jobs go. We have no ministry which has accurate data on job creation. So first, I can show you 4 different reports in the last 6 weeks alone, and they are completely different from each other in terms of job creation. We at FICCI believe that we are creating 4 to 5 billion jobs a year instead of the target of 8 to 10 million. Now, so that's one aspect. I think last year also the 4 or 5 billion jobs.
In fact,
were
back
created.
in 2014, Prime Minister Modi said he would create 10 million jobs.
Yes, so I'm coming to it. So I think to the best of our knowledge and to the best of the statistics that we can track, and we have requested the government to put in a system to accurately track not only the job data but also industry-wise data. So if they do a certain policy, we must be able to know in 2 years, 3 years time how positively it has affected that sector. Today we can't know that. The other thing is, in India, the informal job creation, and you know, in India the informal market is a very large market, informal labor market, that there is no tracking of. There is nobody in India, there is no Ministry of Statistics which tracks that accurately. So we are now able to tell you how many jobs are created in the formal sector, but the informal sector is not known. However, what you say is partly correct. I think there is an issue in India in terms of the number of jobs that we are able to create. And I think for that, even more liberalization would be required so that the potential of the economy is further unleashed. The good news is that many of the new age industries are creating hundreds of thousands of jobs. So to give you an example, we have, for example, the Olas, and we have an Indian competitor called Ola. We have these Swiggy and Zomato, which are these food deliveries. These are all new concepts in India. They have grown over the last 3-4 years. And these people have a potential to create a significant number of jobs, which type of jobs were not existing earlier. So I don't see, I'm not a pessimist. I think work still needs to be done, but we need to create more jobs as an economy.
Part of the myth surrounding the job market in India, I'm afraid, has a lot to do with those who are not willing to find jobs. They are not called job seekers, and therefore they are not, they do not fall into the category of the unemployed. Having said this, let's look at, say, foreign direct investment, FDI, in India between 2017 and 18. New investment project in your country dropped by 38.4% between 17 and 18, and that's the worst since 2012. So what do you think of the unwillingness by foreign investors to go to India? Is that because of the rise of protectionism and unilateralism, the growing uncertainties surrounding the outlook of the world economy?
So I see uncertainty is there in the global economy. I think most countries have forecast their 2019 growth downwards. That includes the U.S, includes Germany, includes France, includes the U.K. I think there is general perception that 2018 was a better year than 2019. Having said that, I think there is also a certain amount of protectionism going around the world, and it will have some instability in the economy, in the world economy. It does bring about some instability. Having said that, I think India is a market which depends to a great extent on internal consumption. We have 1.27 billion internal customers, and the market is very large internally. So if you will see, not that many companies in India compared to many of the other developing economies are export oriented. They cater mostly to the Indian market, and I think investment has been poor because of high interest rates, because our interest rates locally have been are at a lifetime high. Our real interest rates are 400 basis points higher than ever. So I think the high interest rates are causing lack of investment rather than anything else, rather than uncertainty. Because if you put in a project into India today and your market is the domestic customer, there is not that much uncertainty. If your market is the export, let us say the U.S, you could have, depending on the product category, some uncertainty. But within India, there is not uncertainty, and India has been able to attract a good amount of FDI over the last few years, over $200 billion. So,
in theory, India should be a very attractive destination for foreign direct investment, given the low labor costs, as well as relocation of labor-intensive manufacturing R&D from China to other low-income economies. India is one of them. My knowledge about domestic spending in India is different from yours. In fact, domestic consumption has slowed down and shows signs of weakness. Tell me the number of your middle-income consumers in India. See, the domestic consumption that you're talking of slowing down, it's a very recent phenomenon. It has started in sometime in November of 18. And the last quarter?
Yes, the last quarter. And we can see that effect still. I think the RBI has to cut the interest rates quite significantly. We as a Chamber of Commerce at FICCI have requested the RBI governor to cut the interest rates by 100 basis points minimum to spur the economy, to lower the EMI rates. Depending on the category of product you are in, the middle class can be from 250 to 700 million people. It's a very large bandwidth. Depends what product category you are looking at. But most people believe that the middle class is about 450 million people and growing.
But then you have 1 billion people.
That's right.
Who are not called middle-income consumers, because you are the second biggest population.
Yeah.
Oh, by the way, India and China combined account for 40% of the world's total, which is put at 7 billion.
That's right.
That's a lot. And China is fast becoming old before we become rich. Having said this, you have 200 million impoverished population. What are you going to do with such a huge number in the coming years? And I mean, the BJP is facing elections. So what will be the campaign pledges of Prime Minister Modi?
So, you know, you're right. India historically has had a lot of poor people. But if you see the statistics, year on year they are falling. And this year what the Modi government has done, and they have been very focused in their approach, they have basically given direct subsidy to supplement the farmer's income directly to the farmer, bypassing all the normal channels directly into the bank account of poor farmers. So I think they have now targeted these schemes. They have introduced health insurance for the poor. So they can have a family can claim up to 500,000 rupees if they ever fall into any kind of sickness, and any good hospital will treat them. The government will pay the bill. In the latest interim budget, because you know there is an election, the final budget will come in July. In the interim budget, the Honorable Finance Minister of India has covered all unregulated labor, which is 95%, 96% of the labor force, into a pension scheme, which is unheard of before. So these people, once they retired from their job, informal jobs, where there is less certainty in any case, they had no support from either the state or from their own savings.
Excuse me, Sandeep, can you quickly give us a clear definition about what you call unregulated labor force?
Yes. So there is a formal labor in India which is employed by the larger companies, by the mid-sized companies. There is a provident fund that they pay. There is a health insurance that the companies have to pay. The informal, we call it the informal labor force, is people who are employed by mom and pop stores, by agriculture. The agricultural owners, the landowners employ people to till their land, to harvest the fruits, to harvest the vegetables. So this is all informal, and these run into millions and millions of people. Even small scale industry, the really small scale industry, there are 72 million small scale industries in India, and they employ on an average less than 7 people each. So this is all informal.
Does the poor regulation or huge, formidable, unregulated labor force mean massive evasion of tax?
Which is why the government has introduced the GST. It has been the single largest economic reform in India's independent history. It settled down very well. The government has been very responsive to industry in terms of how to implement it. There were certain issues which were causing difficulty in industry. They have responded, and now the collections are going up. GST will ultimately take out the grey market that is there in India and regulate the producers and the sellers better. They will all be caught into the net of tax over a period of time. Having said that, the proof is in the last 2 years, the income tax payers in India have doubled. So that means people who were escaping from the net are now being caught together. So our tax to GDP ratio will improve. It is one of the poorest in the world for a country our size.
What's the debt ratio to GDP in India?
Ad hocly, I can't give you, I don't want to give you a wrong figure.
My knowledge is
it's quite low.
68% of the GDP. China is 30% less.
No, you mean tax to GDP, ours is very low.
Very low?
Very low. Our tax to GDP compared to any developing or developed country, we are very low.
But earlier you were talking about agricultural subsidies in your country, but that's something that has upset many of the industrial nations. Since the Uruguay round of the multilateral negotiations on world trade, despite the fact that the President Trump also subsidized American farmers with, say, $12 billion US. So do you think this has a lot to do with the future of reforming the WTO? How to reform the WTO? Because China becomes very controversial in the debate that we should be regarded as a developed country instead of a developing one?
Well, I think that debate, is an ongoing debate. Ultimately, India will also be going the China way. We will one day also be treated like a developed country. But today, I think the countries are still developing. And I think the WTO is being corroded by the U.S. approach. They don't believe in any multilateralism, at least President Trump doesn't. And he has virtually declared the WTO as an organization which adds no value to the U.S. at all. That's a very dangerous sign, because over a number of years, these multilateral agencies had come to brought everybody into a certain channel and direction. And suddenly now, if everybody is going to go back into their own shells and protect their own markets, I think this will cause disruption in the world.
Thank you so much. You are watching Dialogue with Mr. Sandeep Samani, President of the Federation of Commerce and Industries in India. This is the second talk show that we conducted here in Boao Forum for Asia, the annual event for the media to talk about the economic performance of Asia and beyond. Stay with us. We'll be right back. Welcome back.
Thank you,
Sandeep. Earlier in the lead-in, we were talking about the trade tensions between India and the United States. President Trump threatens to cancel all preferential policies in favor of Turkey and India. But in an election year for Prime Minister Modi, will that be a disaster?
No. I think of our total exports to the U.S., the preferential tariff is only for $5 billion worth of goods. And the duties that are going to be imposed are between 2 and 6, 7 or 7%. So I don't think it will make a major difference. And these are large corporates which are exporting, and many of them are specialized products. I don't think it will make too much a difference to their P&L. They'll just absorb the duty. To the general mass of the country, this doesn't make much difference.
Last year, your growth rate was the fastest among all, but you are the sixth biggest economy. To my knowledge, your economic total was put at 2.7 trillion, whilst the Chinese is 13 trillion. We are 5 times your economic size. But what do you think of the economic and trade complementarities between these two economies?
So I think the India-China trade is growing quite rapidly. I think the two countries need to work together even more closely. India needs to actually reset its export to more value-added products to China. Today we send you raw materials, some chemicals and some intermediate products. I think China is a very good economy to look at for developing for Indian exports. We import from China a lot of electronics and capital goods now. More and more machines going into Indian factories are now of Chinese origin instead of European or American, because the technology here has significantly improved and the Chinese equipment is now world class. So I think there is a lot of scope for the two countries to work closer with each other to develop their economic relations. And I think from a point of view of the globe, they are much closer together. I think they will be the second and third largest economies in the world. They are the most populous economies. So I think we need to bring our people even closer. I think the relations are good, but we can improve them even further.
President Xi Jinping and Prime Minister Modi reached a consensus in Wuhan summit following the Doklam crisis that the two countries should not antagonize each other in their cooperation and competition in this region of Asia. Having said this, what do you think of our investment in your infrastructure construction and, of course, online payment as well as e-commerce in the age of digital technology, big data and artificial intelligence? What do you think of the Indian concerns about the debt trap? I was told that the Indian media who were the first to put forward the idea of a debt trap by the Chinese companies in developing countries when we try to build a Belt and Road Initiative into realities. What are the Indian concerns when we reach out to India and make investment there?
So let's deal with the subjects that you raised separately. So in e-commerce, India is a The e-commerce in India is growing dramatically, very, very fastly. In fact, one of the major Chinese players is the largest investors in the Indian e-commerce space.
Alibaba.
Alibaba is the largest shareholder in the payment gateway, which is doing exceedingly well. I think in terms of infrastructure, I think broadly in India the infrastructure is developed by the government. We have a PPP model, but it has not been very successful. Private entrepreneurs prefer to do investment in other than infrastructure. Only successful model where private people are working is roads. In power, in ports, also there is some private investment, but a bulk of the investment comes from the government. Airports are now being privatized, so that is another infrastructure area where India is opening up.
In fact, in the understatement of my earlier question, Sandeep, Prime Minister Shinzo Abe of Japan said he's proud of the Japanese quality and technology in building high-speed railway in a competition with the Chinese bidders. What do you think of our bidding process? Do you think that China is welcome, or you'd rather turn to Japan for a more expensive investment?
See, I am no expert on the railways, so I can't comment on the technology. From what I can see as a consumer here and having experienced your rails system is very well connected and very good. How the evaluation was done, how the bidding process was done, I am not familiar because this is a government invited bid, and ultimately it has gone for the Japanese railway, the Shinkansen, for the one route which is from Ahmedabad to Mumbai, two large cities in the western part of India. I am sure if this is successful, they will bid for other large connections between other large cities, and I'm sure they are quite open to Chinese participation. You know, there were many power plants where only European and American suppliers were supplying the critical equipment. There are many power plants now running with Chinese turbines and all the critical, supercritical turbines. So I don't think there is any issue in terms of mind block in terms of Chinese equipment. I think different companies or different governments have a different way of pitching for the projects, and I think India is quite open to investments. They do welcome FDI. In fact, the next stage, in my opinion, for China is the setting up of Chinese ventures in India using FDI route. In fact, your phone companies have made a tremendous success in India, and they have beaten people like Nokia and Samsung, and they have now invested in India under the Make in India program. 5 years ago, India did not make one phone, not one mobile phone. Now there are 250 factories making components and phones, and in the Make in India program, 670,000 direct and indirect jobs have been created just by making mobile phones in India.
30 to 40 years ago, you know, there was a popular saying among the Chinese, 要想富, 先修路. If you want to get rich, you have to build roads into villages, underdeveloped villages. Now, what do you think of the prospects of the BRICS economies? You know, in the immediate aftermath of the 2008 financial meltdown, G20 instead of G7 captured headlines, and people were talking about the competitive edge and the rise of BRICS economies as well as emerging markets. Today, however, it seems economies, emerging markets are all slowing down. What do you think of the future of having G7 back instead of focusing on G20?
No, I think the emerging economies, if you take a longer period of time, will do well because they have their inherent strength. They have a relatively young population. They have the ability to spend the population, and the population in most of the developed world is in negative. So there will be lack of consumption, and there are no young people. I'm told in the UK, for example, in 10 years or 15 years' time, a significant portion of the population will be over 80 years old. So, you know, it's going to be difficult to support that many old people because the burden falls on the few youngsters that remain. So I think to that extent, the BRIC economies are young economies, and I see a good future for them. Of course, country to country it will vary. I believe China and India have an excellent future. The Brazilian economy depends more on the various raw materials because they are an exporting economy. Lumber, iron ore, copper, they're very mineral rich. So is South Africa. South Africa, though, has to sort out its governance. A new president has come in, and we believe that he is doing all the right things to sort out issues relating to corruption and misgovernance. Russia, again, is a powerhouse in terms of oil, gas. They're the largest producer of oil. Again, very mineral-rich country. So I believe they will continue to do well.
But we also ironically have the saying of resource curse. Yeah. Because of one country's reliance on raw materials and commodity exports. Now, the average lifespan of the Chinese people is 4 years more than the Indian average, which is put at 68. Correct. We are quite jealous of your pharmaceutical industry, hence the huge box office success of a movie in China last year. It's called Dying to Survive. The story is about how to import drugs that cancer patients need badly in this huge market. We have a lot to learn from India in terms of benefiting the poor and then those in need. What do you think of, say, the young labor force of India? Does that mean you'll quickly catch up and you'll be the second biggest economy in terms of total size?
Let me answer the two questions differently. The government of India has been very conscious that health is a fundamental right and must be available to all people, whether rich, middle class or poor. That is why in many cases the government of India regulates the price of drugs, life-saving drugs. And there's a lot of drug production in India, a lot of good pharmaceutical companies of Indian origin in India. And now they've gone global. We are, I think, the largest producer of drugs and exporter of drugs which are non-patented. So which once the rights go off, we are the largest producer. And our prices are very reasonable. So that's why we have been able to capture a large portion of the market. And that is why the average life expectancy in India has also gone up. So I think that is a good policy. Because in some countries the drugs are too expensive, because India does not have the support system. We don't have an insurance system for all our people. Insurance is a voluntary thing. Most of our population does not have medical insurance. So therefore the price of the drugs has to be kept low. Coming to the point whether we will be the second largest economy, I don't think in the near future. I think China will continue to be the leader in terms of size, because you're already 4 or 5 times larger than us.
But the nationalist media in India are happily talking about your vision and ambition. Size matters, doesn't it? Well, it's no easy job to talk about the Indian economy. Whilst there is the wide and broad income discrepancy, there's also the national pride of pharmaceuticals in India that benefit enormously the ordinary folks, the poor. In this particular area, China has a lot to learn from our neighboring country of India, which is, after all, a democracy that respects the well-being of the ordinary folks, the disadvantaged. I'll see you next time. Goodbye.